Hello folks, and welcome to our webinar series for 2017. Today's SSP webinar is an update on open access books. All is not green and gold. I'm Jeff Lang with the American Chemical Society and the chair of the SSP webinars working group. And we're pleased that you could join us today. Before we get started and hear from our distinguished panelist speakers, you'll be seeing the SSP splash screen while I go over a few housekeeping items. Your phone will be muted automatically in consideration of our presenters and our following webinar participants. Please use the chat feature set to organizers and panelists only to send in your questions if you need to let us know that you're having any technical difficulties, and all questions will be saved until after the panelists have spoken. You can specify which presenter you'd like to direct your question to, just so our moderator can be sure to pose it to the correct presenter. You can also please send your questions as we go instead of waiting until the end. At the conclusion of today's presentations, you'll receive a webinar evaluation via email. We encourage you to provide feedback so that we can continually improve the SSP webinar program, and we will also receive an email link to the recorded broadcast of this webinar and the slides. Our moderator today is Tom Beyer, Platform Services Director at Sheridan Pub Factory. Tom has been involved with the creation of book platforms for almost 20 years. And now I'll be turning over to Tom so he can introduce our panelists and get us started.
Hi, everyone. I think we've got a great panel of speakers who represent quite a range of perspectives on book publishing today, so I'm pretty sure this is going to be an interesting hour. First up, we'll have Rod Cookson. Rod has worked in scientific and educational publishing for more than 20 years, helping publishing evolve to best serve researchers' needs. He's currently Managing Director of IWA Publishing, which spreads knowledge about the world's most valuable resource, water. Rod previously spent 8 years at Taylor & Francis as editorial director, transforming the Earth Biological and Environmental Science Journal division and bringing medical journals back into the organization. Rod has also worked for Blackwell Publishing and Reed Education. Roz Pine will be next, and she's the head of policy and development, open research at Springer Nature, where she manages projects in support of the company's open access strategy and policies, and heads up the Open Access Monograph program. In her time at the company, she has developed and implemented campaigns, including the first publisher-led trial of open peer review for academic books, the publication of Palgrave Macmillan's first open access chapter in a hybrid book, the transition of Nature Communications to full open access, and the development of Springer Nature's open access policy and funding support service for authors. Then we'll have Charles Watkinson, who is Associate University Librarian for Publishing at University of Michigan Library and Director of the University of Michigan Press, a merged position unique in academic publishing. He's been a board member of the Association of the American University Presses and the Society for Scholarly Publishing, and was an initiator of the Library and Publishing Coalition. He's currently the PI on several grants from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation aimed at improving the infrastructure for the publication of digital scholarship in the humanities. He's recently completed work on a research project called Mapping the Free Ebook Supply Chain. And then finally, we'll end with Sven Fund. In 2015, Sven founded Full Stop, a consulting and investment agency specializing in scholarly publishing as well as institutions in the educational space. Sven invests in and or manages companies such as the Journal of Medical Insight and Inkit.com, and is the CEO of Knowledge Unlatched, one of the leading initiatives in open access. Sven is a lecturer at Humboldt University and publishes on open access as well as the digital transformation of the publishing industry. So with that, let's get started with Rod.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, so I'm going to talk about IWA Publishing and what we have done in the past 5 years with open access book publishing and the opportunities that we're excited about in the coming years. Before I do, I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are. We're a fairly typical society STM publisher. We're a charity with a global membership base. The majority of what we publish is research, but we find books are a particularly useful mechanism for reaching our practitioner audiences worldwide. And when that is combined with open access, an especially good way of reaching practitioners in particular in low-income countries. So a real valuable extension of our global footprint. So, what have we been doing? What have we been doing in the past 5 years? The first free-to-access book we published was in 2009, and the first fully paid open access book, 2013. We now have a complete collection of 31 open books, which are free in different forms. 7 of those are completely open access, fully paid up titles, and another 23 are free to view in different ways. And we also have 1 book which is an interesting hybrid. It is for sale to purchasers and to subscribers, and 5 chapters within the book are open access. Those titles are particularly focused on the developmental content we have and on healthcare issues, and they've been funded by organizations like the World Bank and various United Nations organizations. We've found the number of open access books that we are publishing is increasing quite rapidly as we go forward. We have 3 more completely fully open access books in production, 2 of which are in Spanish, another 3 contracts pending, and 4 more proposals that we are evaluating. And if I just make one fairly obvious point, our free-to-access books are the most downloaded titles we publish, and indeed one of them, which is a very good topic with very active authors, has been downloaded more than 20,000 times. As a society, we do care about having reasonable publication charges. Our base book publishing charge is $8,750 based on a typical book of 140 pages. If a book is longer, those charges can go up. If it's shorter, those charges can go down. And we also have rates for individual chapters at the levels you can see here. As with anything in society publishing, we find partners invaluable to developing our portfolio and our list. And back in October 2015, we put 3 of our free-to-access books in the directory of open access books, and also the same 3 books in OAMPI, very much in a spirit of experiment to see what would happen. Would it be a good thing? Would it cause us problems? The first of those titles I've got some data for here is a very developmental focused book, Sanitation and Hygiene in Africa. It had been published 2 years when we put it into OAMPI, so the majority of the sales we would expect to have had occurred by that point, and we've indeed only had 2 print sales since then, which doesn't surprise us. What we want from this title at this stage in its life is visibility and particularly usage in Africa. And we're very pleased to see that OAMPI coverage has created more than twice as many downloads as the ebook on our own platform. So a significant extension of reach through OAMPI there. The picture is somewhat different with the second title we have here, Fecal Sludge Management, which is more of a technical book of interest in countries around the world. That book had been published for a year when we went into OAMPI, and still had many sales to come, and we're pleased to see that sold 56 printed copies since we put it into OAMPI at a price point of around $200. It's quite an expensive title, so around $10,000 of sales since then. And we're especially intrigued to see that usage is the reverse of the African title, almost 5 times as much usage from the free version on our platform as OAMPI. And leak detection, another fairly technical, quite specific book, a pattern somewhere in between. Some print sales, but most usage coming from OAMPI. We're very interested to understand more about who is using the books, so we have done some analysis on the geography and uptake of those different books, and there are some interesting patterns which emerge from that. The Sanitation and Hygiene in Africa book has been used the most, and as you'd expect, has been used in Africa. It's also been used in advanced countries a great deal, so the US, Germany, UK and Australia. Brazil, obviously, with some similarities to Africa. Leak detection, on the other hand, has had significant usage in India, where water loss is a major issue, and again, quite a lot of usage in advanced countries. Fecal sludge management, much more broadly based. Something we are intrigued by are the 2 West African countries you can see on this chart, one of which has used almost entirely Sanitation and Hygiene in Africa. The other country has used all 3 books in equal measure. So we're digging into that data to better understand quite what's gone on and see how we extend our reach through this participation. As a footnote, I would say that OAPN has agreed some terms of reference for open access books with funding organizations, including the ERC, Wellcome Trust, and FWF in Austria. We have signed up for these terms and conditions, something we've done quite recently, and we're interested to see how this allows us to work more fully with those funders in publishing open access books. So, what are we excited about? First thing we're interested in is Knowledge Unlatched, which is a system for crowdfunding books and making them open access. Sven is going to talk in detail about that later in this webinar, so I won't say anything more at this point, but we think this is a very interesting operation, an opportunity for us. We're also conscious from our work on open access with journals that administrative tasks around open access are significant. We use RightsLink to process payments for our journals, and we're exploring whether that might be useful for books too. And something we're very interested in is the administrative tie-in that RightsLink are developing with funders, so that payment systems with funders and funders' administrative centers are integrated with RightsLink. And we're keen to make sure that open access in our books is something we can support easily and we can integrate into systems as we need to with key players in the system. There's also an opportunity for the association itself. We have a particular interest in urban water questions, and we're developing a series of very short ebooks, typically about 30 pages long, called Blue Notes, which will address these topics. We'll publish them in series of 3, ideally 4 series per year, and this will be paid for by industrial sponsors. We have the first sponsor lined up already for the first year, and we see this as a really interesting way that open access is going to let us publish content we wouldn't have done before. It's not a book really in the traditional way, it's not a journal, and it lets us reach core audiences that we know matter in the practitioner sector that have previously been outside our reach. And I will wrap up just by asking a question. We do pay book authors royalties. I think our book authors would say those weren't very big royalties, but nonetheless they do get money from us. It is possible in an open access future the authors get less money, but they get more impact in exchange. So I think if you ask most researchers, does that work for them as a trade? I think they would take the impact. But I've just put this here as a pointer for societies in a similar situation to us to fully understand that perhaps the financials may change with open access. It may not be a economic reward for authors so much as a reputational reward going forward, and that some of the parameters may change. That's the last point I wanted to make, and I will just thank our open access publisher, Sarah Bosshart, who's been invaluable in putting these slides together for her contribution. Thank you, Sarah.
Great. And next up we have Ross Pine from Springer Nature.
Roz, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about open access books at Springer Nature. We publish open access books and chapters under 2 imprints, so under Springer Open and Palgrave Macmillan. So these 2 publishers were brought together by the merger of Springer Nature. But interestingly, both publishers had been exploring open access for some time. So Springer was one of the first big publishers to offer open access books. We published our first open access book back in 2011 and have been formally offering that option since 2012. And then Palgrave opened up open access options in 2013 and was, as far as we're aware, the first major publisher to offer the Creative Commons Attribution license for open access books, the most open license. And one interesting thing about what we're doing is that we end up offering open access books across a very wide range of subject areas, essentially across any subject area in which we would publish a scholarly book. So everything from clinical medicine, bioscience, through physical sciences and engineering, through political science, right up to, say, theatre and performance studies. In terms of our model, we use a book processing charge model, so similar to the IWA, and again, very similar to some standard journal models. And our book processing charge covers all the costs of commissioning, copy editing, proofreading, production, dissemination, promotion, online hosting, and indexing in services like the Directory of Open Access Books. So our BPC is very much covering all the costs associated with the book. We do make a print version available because we know that there are still some communities that value print, but we reduce the cost of print compared to our standard scholarly monographs, and that's in recognition of the fact that many of the costs have been covered by BPC. So for the print version, we're really just having to cover the paper, the distribution, the physical production of the book. And we also had in mind that we wanted to ensure that our business models were sustainable and weren't dependent on print models to prop up the open access. I mentioned before that we promote the Creative Commons attribution license for our books. We support this because we think it's the most, because it is the most open license, the one that's most in line with the principles of open access, because it allows any form of reuse, providing the authors are correctly attributed. We do recognize that in the case of books in particular, as compared with articles, there may be good reasons that authors want to put slightly more restrictive licenses. For example, in the humanities, we find that non-derivative licenses that ensure that authors can control translations of their work are particularly popular. But we do still end up publishing the vast majority of our open access books under CC BY, and our BPCs also reflect that, the fact that we are allowing commercial reuse of these books, and that means that we're essentially not expecting any further revenue streams from them. And we've been offering open access across a wide range of book types, so across monographs and edited collections, but also for proceedings, for protocols, for short form books, and for chapters within books that are otherwise available for purchase. One very important principle for us is about quality, and that our open access books have to meet exactly the same standards that we would expect of all of our titles. They go through exactly the same peer review process, and we don't tell peer reviewers whether or not a book is going to be open access if that's something that we know at that point, so that it can't prejudice their opinions about the book. And when we publish the book, it gets exactly the same service as our non-open access books in terms of the marketing and the promotion, and in terms of how we're promoting it on our own websites and elsewhere. We might send it to some extra open access repositories, but aside from that, it's all about making sure that open access books equal status to non-open access books. So in the 5 or so years that we've been publishing open access books, we've now published almost 400 open access books. And one thing that I thought might be interesting to look at was the subject split of these books. So we know if we look at journals, the vast majority of open access journal content is in science and technology and medicine. But if we look at the books, we're finding a very different trend. So of those 400 books, almost a quarter have been published in the humanities, a further 60 in business and political sciences. And then if you look at where we're publishing books within the sciences, the most popular areas have been the physical sciences and engineering. Again, a reversal of the trend that we've seen in open access journals, where life sciences have very much led the way. It's also interesting to note that this isn't just a reflection of what we publish in a non-open access context, because our humanities divisions are actually publishing a higher proportion of their books open access than our science divisions. And I think that probably reflects the importance of scholarly books to authors publishing in the humanities and the social sciences, but I find it really heartening that we are seeing open access uptake in those areas. I mentioned that quality was very important to us, and we've really been trying to make the case for open access books having equal status to non-open access books, so we've been really pleased to be able to publish some quite significant authors, including a Nobel Prize winner, and to partner with the Wellcome Trust to publish their first open access book back in 2013. So to step back a bit, I wanted to look at some authors' attitudes. What's the future for open access books? We do find that book authors are still often unfamiliar with open access, and again, that might reflect the subjects that tend to publish books. So we surveyed our authors recently, and we found that 40% of them said they weren't sufficiently familiar with open access to say whether they would be likely to publish a future book open access. But on a more heartening side, we also found that another 40% said that if they were publishing a book again in the future, they would be very likely or quite likely to publish that book open access, which is actually a much higher proportion than you might expect. Interestingly, given the trends we've seen and what we've actually published, we found that authors in the biomedical and life sciences were more likely to say that they would publish a future book open access than authors in other disciplines. One ongoing challenge for open access books is funding. We know that an awful lot of book authors don't have a specific budget for publication costs, and where they do have a budget, it can often be lower than the funds that are required for a full open access book. That said, we are starting to see funding open up from funders and institutions that are keen to support open access. So we've been looking at this and have identified 18 funders and 46 institutions which are formally making funding available for open access books. So we're starting to see some movement here, but for comparison, on the journal side, those figures are more like 100 funders and 175 institutions that are formally making funding available for open access articles. So books are still at a much earlier stage of development. We're also finding that the formal funding is concentrated in North America and Europe, where so we're not seeing the movement across, say, for example, Asia, where we publish a lot of journal articles, and that many of the ebook funders are national research councils. But we've also found that there are a lot of funders of open access books that are doing it less officially. So people who find for, say, books in international development, for books in education, that there are specific reasons why they want to make a particular title open access, and they think it's really worth the charge in order to get the extra usage that we see for open access books. So where will we go in the future? We're certainly actively growing our open access books program. It's something we think there's a lot of potential in. We're interested to see if we can offer an open access option for every type of scholarly book. What about professional titles? What about reference titles? We'd like to be in a world where if you're publishing a book, you always have the option to make it available open access. I think we do need continued experimentation. I'm interested in the option of retrospective open access for backlist titles. We know that that can be a tricky subject because, of course, people have already paid for those titles, but also we know that there are a lot of authors who published a book that's still very valued and very much read, but they would have had an open access option at the time when they published it. So is there something that we can do for those authors? I'm interested to know what is it that people value when they're publishing a book. So as I said, at the moment our position is very much that we want to give sort of full service to open access books, to give them equal status, to offer all the same services that you would get for a non-open access book. But might they be interested in some kind of light version, so to speak, with fewer services but perhaps a lower publishing fee? We certainly need continued experiments. We need to keep sharing our results. We need to keep talking about how we can expand open access book publishing. I just wanted to finish with a stat from another recent survey we did where we were talking to our institutional contacts. And 70% of our contacts agreed or strongly agreed that all future scholarly books should at some point be made available open access. And I think that's a really nice thing for us to try to aim for. Thanks very much. I've put some links up here in case you want to get in touch or find out more about our programs.
Great, thanks very much, Roz, for that. And now, next up, we've got Charles Watkinson from the University of Michigan Press.
Hello there. Thank you for this opportunity. So I'm going to talk about open access books at Michigan Publishing. And Michigan Publishing, the main imprint of our organization is University of Michigan Press, which is a mid-size US-based university press. And we publish about 110 books a year, and open access has been a growing part of our list. So in 2017, 16% of the books that we publish will be open access. And we've also engaged in quite a lot of retrospective backlist open access. So now we have just over 1,100 books available in various forms of free-to-read open access. I'm showing the website for the University of Michigan Press here because I wanted to show one of our recent open access books made available with the assistance of Knowledge Unlatched is a recent prize winner. And this emphasizes that our books that are open access are very much just treated in the way that we treat all our other books. There's no differentiation. And we put some of our best books into open access format if we feel that they can reach other audiences. So Alienation Effects is a good example of one of those. So we've been doing open access books for a while, since about 2005, and we continue to experiment with a number of different funding models. Our earliest experiments were freemium, a series called Digital Culture Books, which we made available open access in a suboptimal way, just free to view. Readers would have to pay to download, and the aim there was to recover funding from print and premium ebook versions that we could subsidize the free-to-view version with. We're seeing a move away from that model. It's suboptimal for users, and while it may operate in a sustainable way on a program level, reader behavior change is eroding the opportunity. In other words, readers seem to be much more comfortable reading an ebook and don't require the premium download or the premium print version. Our next experiments were really focused on crowd-funded approaches, and we're still really interested in those. We've been a vigorous participant in Knowledge Unlatched, and we also provide support for an initiative called Lever Press, which is an open access publishing imprint which is funded by a group of liberal arts college libraries. Some concerns there about the scalability of these models, and some tricky things here about aligning schedules, especially with Knowledge Unlatched. How can we make sure that we don't announce a book that will be sold in conventional ways and then make it open access later? So just scheduling issues. And then finally, we do engage in producer pays initiatives, and we're especially looking at the expansion of open access funds in North American institutions under the label currently OAMPI, Open Access Monograph Publishing Initiative, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. There are some real concerns there, especially because of the concentration of funding in the hands of institutions who employ authors, concerns about academic freedom, and some concerns about disenfranchising authors from less wealthy institutions. So Roz mentioned the growth of North American institutional funding, and the Open Access Monograph Publishing Initiative is currently expanding. It currently has 13 institutions who are gradually putting online dedicated open access book publishing funds. And here are 3 of those. University of Michigan is one, Indiana University, Emory University, and there's a list of the 13 participating institutions in the first round there. So all of these institutions will be putting online funding opportunities for their authors. There's some variability between the programs, variations around eligibility of publishers. Many restrict funding to just non-profit publishers, and some even just to university presses. Michigan is open to all kinds of publisher. Eligibility of authors, this is a big area around whether it's just tenure-track professors who are funded or also adjuncts. That's getting back to the disenfranchisement danger. And then the focus of the program, some of these projects, grant programs are really focused on digital innovation. Some of them are focused much more on reach. And for example, University of Michigan has decided to focus on fairly conventional formats, but open access as a form of greater outreach for the benefit of the university's faculty. And then quite a lot of variation around the amount of funding available per book. $15,000 does seem to be a regular number. Some programs will be looking at lower funding, others at more flexible funding with potential of higher numbers. So worth looking at. There's a website now on the Association of Research Libraries site, arl.org, and you can find out more about the initiative there. So we haven't published a huge proportion of our list open access, but we are seeing thinking about open access as a really good way to rethink many things about how we do our publishing. Because there's actually a strong overlap between the idea of open access and digital scholarship. And while they're not clearly not the same, rethinking how we do things with the growing interest among our authors in digital scholarship it can really overlap with our thinking about open access. So the first thing that we've been working on is revising our author contract. So we have a completely different author contract for open access books, which we developed with the help of Emory University's model publishing contract for digital scholarship. And this is a very useful pro forma template set of documents that Emory has developed with support from the Mellon Foundation. And even if one doesn't use all the documents that they provide as a model, there are many useful clauses in there. So we've created a derivative contract from the openly licensed Emory work. And I've included a link, modelpublishingcontract.org, for those who might want to use their models. Secondly, we've been working on better understanding our per book costs. So this is partly to think about ways in which we can adapt our costs downwards to meet the reality of the limited funding for open access that Roz pointed out. But it's also partly so that we can be very transparent about why we charge what we charge when we put together a book publishing charge. Our book publishing charges currently do vary, and they are fairly contextual based on the type of book. So we're not necessarily publishing a one figure. And that's because we also learned as part of this Ithaca study on open access on monograph publishing costs, just how much variation there can be in the types of acquisitions heavy books that we produce. Thirdly, there is a strong overlap between digital innovation and open access. An open access book can sort of participate in a networked environment in a much richer way than a closed access book. So we've been working on creating a new publishing platform which will support open access and closed access books, but will be particularly valuable for open access books and really showing how digital affordances like commenting and annotation really flourish in an open access environment. So that's called Fulcrum, and you can learn more at fulcrum.org. And then we've also been engaging with the discovery challenges that open access books have. The book discovery environment has many intermediaries providing important services, but companies like Gobi Library Services, like EBSCO, very, very important in this space, with business models traditionally based on taking a portion of revenue, a portion of the book sale cost. So those are companies that are really trying to adapt to make sure that they're featuring open access books and that they're also clearly communicating when an open access book, when an open access version is available of a closed access book. So we did recently do a study called Mapping the Free Ebook Supply Chain, and we were really finding how important this sort of alternative supply chain has become, with Directory of Open Access Books, but Facebook, Twitter, even Sci-Hub, all these different players who are really enabling the discovery of open access content, and sometimes at the expense of the conventional information supply chain partners. A notable exception to that is JSTOR, and open access ebooks on JSTOR have been a terrific boost for us, and we're finding far more usage on JSTOR for our open access books than any other platform. And finally, rethinking metrics and indicators. With the currency of open access being usage rather than dollars for our authors, we really want to improve the way in which we can communicate the sorts of extra reach, extra engagement those books are getting. And we're struggling a little bit with this. We're trying to sort of piece together a number of different sources of information and provide it to authors in a compelling way. Downloads are a big one, and those numbers, those little graphs there, actually show our performance on JSTOR, where we're finding that our open access books on JSTOR are downloaded on average about 65 times more than our closed access books. Altmetrics, we've put on all our books Altmetrics for books. That's very valuable. And finally, we've experimented with inserting a questionnaire link into all our open access books, and getting some really good responses from readers who like getting something for free and are willing to give back some information to us in response. So we're getting some nice stories back about how readers are actually finding, acquiring, and using our open access books. So that's from all there is from me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Charles. That was terrific. And our final speaker, Sven Fund. I'll take it away.
Hello, everybody, and have a nice afternoon from sunny Berlin. Let me give you a very brief overview of what we are doing at Knowledge Unlatched. Time has progressed quite significantly in this conversation already, and I want to jump directly into where we are right now. I think you will get the slides later on, so you can take a look at where we come from. I think the mechanism of Knowledge Unlatched, which combines a library crowdfunding approach basically with a global initiative, is well known. Otherwise, you can see that here. What we've been doing over the last rounds, as we called them in the beginning, with the help of many presses, I think IWA, Rod, and also Charles mentioned that already, is really growing the core and the relevance of Knowledge Unlatched in the humanities and social sciences. You can see that we got 950 submissions for titles for the running round, and we just need to make sure now that we get enough funding from libraries around the world for that. A lot of presses participating. Our approach is the contrast to probably what larger publishers do on their programs, which is combining a lot of small presses and labor-intensive work, therefore, in libraries into one approach, basically under one roof. You can see that we have been trying to mimic a lot of ebook deals in our formats. So we work with OAMPI, HathiTrust, also with Clocks and Portico, and there is certainly a print version for every title available from the respective presses. What we are working on right now, and I don't know whether you saw on the Scholarly Kitchen and on other channels, our communication is really growing the core of Knowledge Unlatched beyond what it has been so far. So you can see in this graph, KU has always been the KU Select, focusing on books and journals. From next year on, we will also provide STM titles in both books and journals. But we have been starting this year actually to take partners on board, starting with Language Science Press and Open Commons and Phenomenology, but now also Luminos, Open Edition, How Books, and we expect another few initiatives to join us for 2018. And I will tell you in a minute why we think this makes sense, not only for Knowledge Unlatched, for the publishers, but particularly for the library world, because we see that there is a lot of intransparency and a lot of activity in the space that is not really being harmonized, basically, and we feel that a lot of libraries are shying away from supporting open access because they don't quite understand the different models, or these different models, and Charles mentioned that already, come in at different times, and they need to constantly make decisions on relatively small amounts of money. We are trying to harmonize that in a way so that everybody benefits from it. And then there's KU Open Services, which is more geared towards publishers who start open access but don't really understand the full spectrum yet, don't want to devote resources to it, and I will come back to that in a minute. So the idea of the KU Partners models is really that we connect funders to different ideas and approaches to open access. We believe it is a fragmented space, as I said, both on the publisher and on the funder side. And on the library side, also consortia are getting involved in the case of Knowledge Unlatched. We felt that one platform which we built over the last few years can really help in outreach and pledging, and that one global sales team for these different initiatives together can help structure the field and can make librarians' lives easier. And certainly for the partners involved, both Knowledge Unlatched, but everybody else that you can see on this slide, can share the cost and thereby increase efficiency. You know that all these initiatives are rather small and, well, bootstrapped basically, so the approach would really be to make it as efficient as possible. I want to stress that this is an open initiative. It's open to other partners in the future. It's certainly limited by volume, which we can put through the system, but the idea really is to overcome the disadvantages in scale that small initiatives have compared to larger publishers with large scale sales forces by working together on this. On the KU services side, I would like to highlight what we are doing for the publishers. That might be more interesting to people on this webinar. We are trying to help publishers who have a subcritical amount of titles in open access, want to do this as an author service, also as a library service, but don't really know how to get started. The idea is to provide all the services except the funding component that we do at Knowledge Unlatched since several years, which is hosting, reporting, discoverability, archiving, and MARC records, which is part then of discoverability again, to titles that have not been funded through Knowledge Unlatched. And this is really geared towards a very quick turnaround. We work together with a number of partners obviously in here, OAMPI being our hosting partner, and we believe that we can do this within a time frame of 24 hours to make open access as widely available as quickly as possible. And that is already my part. I wanted to save some time for the discussion, and I hope this was still something that was clear and transparent to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sven. That was very interesting. Yeah, so to get to questions. So for the publishers, to what extent do you have the metrics and numbers that you need to be able to tell the story of your open access programs? Has that been an issue for you, or are you? I mean, do you have the sort of feedback that you need there?
Hi, Tom. If I dive in, this is Rod. I guess this is, from our point of view, one of these questions we know exists. It's kind of at a very early stage for us on open access books and on books generally. We'd like to add out metrics to our site next summer. That's part of our plan. So we'll have some more information of the kind that Charles showed for some of the Michigan titles earlier. I mean, the thing we see, most directly is usage, and the thing we're interested in is one of the points that I talked about earlier, which is, are our books being useful? Particularly practitioner titles, are they getting used in the countries we expect people to use them in? And certainly on that usage data, we're getting very interesting data. We're kind of working with small samples if we go away from usage data to some other metrics, but certainly the book that has been most downloaded on our platform, which is an open access title, has in the past 16 months since publication already been cited 12 times, and that is quite impressive for one of our books. It's a very good book from a very good team, but such as we have data on the citations and we benchmark it against the books, we're pretty happy with that, with more work to do on our part. I think that's where we are at the moment.
And this is Charles. I think, I think with the metrics, what we're trying to do is we're trying, as Rod noted, to sort of show some of the open access advantage, as it were. I mean, when we talk to our authors about whether it's valuable to make their book open access, we're often talking about reach into other countries, into the developing world. We're talking about getting to readers outside the academy, getting policy usage, getting media attention. And so when we're talking about those kinds of motivations, we need to find metrics that tell the story that they have achieved those kind of goals. And I think we're struggling a little bit to do that. I mean, some things like ALP metrics really help talk about the policy impact, for example. But we're also, especially with small publishers who rely on third-party aggregations to deliver ebooks a lot of the time, I think we're struggling with getting rich enough usage data back to tell the story of geographical reach, for example, or reach to institutions that are that might not otherwise purchase our books. So I think there's work to be done, but aligned with our goals is probably the focus.
This is Roz. So we have Book Metrics on our platform, which is a service we developed in conjunction with AltMetrics, which shows usage and citations and so forth for all our books, and that's been really great in helping us to demonstrate some of the really high usage that we've seen for open access books. I would echo Charles's point about third-party aggregators, or the benefit of OA being the fact that the books can be put almost anywhere, especially the ones under a cease and buy license. So we can track the usage on our own platform, and some partner sites are very good at sharing usage with us, but it's not necessarily captured in the same way as we might capture it on our own site. So being able to give a complete picture of how those books are being shared is challenging, and something that we'd really like to be able to dig into more. One thing we have been doing over the past few months is a comparative exercise looking at the usage on average of our open access books versus our non-open access books, which is, I guess, something as a publisher with a large traditional base of non-open access books that we have the option to do, and we'll be releasing a report on that shortly. But that's been very interesting to compare.
Yeah. Oh, that'll be very interesting to see that report. Sven, one of the things you talked about was sort of knowledge unlatched being able to provide efficiency. So do you see a role for knowledge unlatched in this reporting question? It does seem like one of the aspects of these open access books is they can be made available on a lot of different platforms, but then you've got a lot of work to do to sort of consolidate usage across them all. Do you see a place for knowledge unlatched there?
Not really. What we are trying to do is to really focus ourselves on the transactional part, so reaching out to libraries with different publisher ideas and initiatives, products if you want, and then getting the pledges in from the libraries. But I am really surprised that in the open access world there is no open usage data repository. And I think that is what is really needed, and it should be mandatory for everybody who offers open access books or journals on their platforms to really provide into that central repository all kinds of information that are necessary, and so that libraries, policymakers, whoever can turn to that platform and look for usage there. So I wouldn't see it for knowledge unlatched. I see it for a kind of intermediary, if you want, like us in this space, yes.
Interesting. Another thing that all of the U.S. publishers mentioned was that you've seen your OA programs increasing. They still seem to be relatively small compared to the total number of books that you publish. Do you have sort of a sense of where you think it's going, where it's going to sort of end up stabilizing as a percentage of the amount of publishing you do?
This is Charles. I think in the US particularly, it's a little hard to see how this is all going to develop because of the lack of federal and national engagement in this issue. I mean, in many European countries, there's such a centralized funding mechanism. But the Open Access Monograph Publishing Initiative from the Association of American Universities and Association of Research Libraries involving AAUP, I think that's a very interesting thing to watch. And, it's a pilot program at the moment. There are only 13 institutions. But I've certainly heard a lot of discussion in the US among institutions, especially among libraries, about how they can devote more of their budgets to open access infrastructure, to open access content. And I mean, you know, a bit of a takeoff in terms of the number of institutions participating in this OAMPI initiative could make a substantial difference to the number of books that we publish open access. But it's going to require institutions to be making their own choices, and that always takes a while.
This is Rod again. If I can add to what Charles said there. I think from our point of view, working in the environmental science area, one thing we're conscious of is we've not really been the target audience for what funding there has been for open access books. I think there's been, you know, a degree of interest more in humanities and social sciences as an area where more help was needed. So I think where we've got funding, it's tended to be piecemeal. You know, it's fitted in with the objectives of particular funding organizations with particular institutions. So it really has been book by book, and that's one of the reasons we're interested in KU and what Sven are doing with his team. If we can, you know, add 1, 2, 3 more open access books a year through that mechanism, then that's really appealing for us. I guess as we go forward, we're certainly talking to European funders about larger arrangements across the breadth of what we publish, and perhaps there are conversations that can be had there where the books and journal piece can be tied up together to make it a bit more integrated and open up some more doors for book open access publishing. But I think essentially the way we see open access at this point is, you know, we have a healthy book publishing program. We want to make sure it keeps being healthy. Open access is helping us keep that program in good shape, and it's specifically helping us reach some of the audiences that we were especially ineffectual at reaching, you know, perhaps 10 years ago or perhaps 20 years ago. So it's steps forward in terms of accessibility for the entire list. It certainly helps with the viability of the list, and I think it's immeasurably valuable in terms of some audiences that we have neglected in the past.
This is Roz. I mean, I think one challenge in terms of books is the sheer diversity of scholarly books, and if you compare books to articles, it means that we need more imaginative and a wider range of solutions for open access for books than perhaps we did for journal articles, and I think that's part of what's causing this slower start. I mean, apart from the funding challenges that we've discussed, is that we're actually probably going to need a number of solutions and ways of making open access books available, and we're still sort of figuring out exactly what those are and what's right in different areas. I mean, there are obvious geographical differences in the way that sort of open access is shifting, but I mean, I think we're certainly starting to see a focus and attention on open access book in the last 2 to 3 years that wasn't there before. So, and I think as more and more publishers start to make those options available, it starts to pique authors' interest. It starts to be something that they're actively asking for, and I think that will help to kind of drive interest from funders. But the final piece of this is, of course, being able to demonstrate the benefits of open access and the reach and the different communities that we can reach through open access. And I think that's also something that we're just beginning to do as we start to gather that data. You know, our programs are starting to mature enough to be able to make those stats available. So I think we're getting there, but early days and very hard to say at this point quite where it will end up.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of following on from that, given the rich diversity of books, are there particular kinds of books that seem particularly well suited for OA, or you know, Charles, you were talking about the fact that there are certain kinds of things you can do with open access books that are harder to do with books that are behind a paywall. So do you see that? Do you see there being a sort of a particular kind of book that's particularly well suited for open access?
I think we're seeing different communities of authors embracing open access for different reasons. So we do and have traditionally seen sort of digital humanities authors being very interested in digital affordances that can work best in an open access environment. That's a fairly niche community. I think probably the most robust area we're seeing interest in open access is with authors who are really interested in public policy impact. So, you know, when we look at our ALP metrics, it's really the books with a specific public policy agenda around gun control or health policy or areas like that, where the authors seem to really be embracing open access. Funders are really amenable to paying publication charges, people like the Hewlett Foundation, and we're having really good success at getting a lot more news coverage, a lot more exposure to the sort of policy publications, and also especially kind of niche news media, people like Politico, Vox, sort of blog type news media. So I think that's a particularly rich area.
And one other thing that came out of your presentation, Charles, I was wondering about was it seemed so you said that you've developed quite a different contract for your OA books. Have there been others workflow issues that you've had to grapple with as you've been expanding the OA program? I'll throw this out to everybody.
Yeah, so just quickly on my side, I mean, I think open access is a lot about equity and concerns about that. And so we've really used the opportunity of open access to think about accessibility issues, thinking about, audiences who have print disabilities as being audiences we really want to engage with, and open access as being a great way to think about how we are best delivering our content to them. And that's also a way of thinking about how we deliver content in a very flexible way that could be accessed by people who don't have high bandwidth connections, for example. So that's a particular area of workflow we've been looking at.
I mean, I think the workflows are challenging, and at a larger scale, we've had to kind of look at every single stage of our workflow and think about what do we need to do to make open access possible, whether that's ensuring that editors are able to sort of talk about open access and are talking about open access, whether that's looking at our production systems and what do we need to do to make sure that we can sort of embed open access information in our metadata and our platforms. How can we make sure that it's visible that these books are open access? Where do we need to be sending the books that might be different from non-open access books? How do we work with library aggregators and so on? So I think at every stage, open access presents some interesting challenges.
It's Rod again here. If I could just add one other thought. I think from our point of view, the workflow piece is relatively straightforward. One of the areas we're interested in understanding a little better is the BPC question, which Roz touched on, and again Charles talked about, and exactly what is the right level of charge per book. And where we are at the moment, we're trying to have affordable BPCs. But I think there's an area here where we definitely have quite a lot more to learn about what's affordable for researchers in different contexts, perhaps practitioners in some different contexts, and how the different costs of types of book we publish vary. So perhaps we might need a differentiated response. So I think if anything, it's sending us back to sort of our blackboard, as it were, to understand exactly how the business works, where's cost generated within the book business, and make sure the proposition we have works for the full spectrum of titles that we publish.
That's great. Well, and I just wanted to say that I think that we've used up our hour, but I thought that was a pretty fascinating conversation. Thanks to our speakers, and I'm going to turn it over to Jeff now.
Yeah, that was really great. Thank you again to Tom and Rod and Roz and Charles and Sven for sharing your expertise with us today and for giving us your viewpoints on today's topic. Thank you all to our audience for attending. And once again, please do take the time to respond to the webinar evaluations that you'll receive in email. Your feedback will help us to continually improve the webinars program. Please also join us for the next SSP webinar, November 14th. Up on your screen at 12 p.m. Note the time difference. We were at 11 p.m. Eastern this time, 12 Eastern next time, for the Scholarly Kitchen webinar, The Future of Quality, Accuracy, and Science Communication. With that, we are concluded. Enjoy the rest of your day.